because the reason why you were sick is because you don't want to have any children, and Chizkiyahu didn't want to have any children because he knew his child would be a Rasha. So today's the day that he got sick, and the Navi refused to daven for him. So he turned over and he davened to the wall. He turned over and faced the wall, and he says, "Afilu cherev chada unachas al chavoy shaladam al yisiyai shonarachamim," and he davened, and in fact he got better. And the day he got better is Erev Pesach, because it was 3 days later he got better, and that was the day. It was the first day of Pesach, and that was the day that Hashem added 10 hours to the day, because Hashem had taken 10 hours away from the day of Achav's Levaya. So they had a very long first day of Pesach. Today's an important day in history. I forgot to mention that yesterday was the Yortzeit of the Rambam, and yesterday was also the Yortzeit of the Shloach Kodesh, and yesterday the broadcast was sponsored by Benzi Bench. Ilonish was his grandfather. I think his name was Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh ben Rabbi Yosy HaKohen, or David Aryeh ben Rabbi Yosy HaKohen, and I hope Benzi will correct me if I'm wrong. David Aryeh ben Rabbi Yosy HaKohen, I think was his name, and the Yortzeit was yesterday. That's Menachem Bench's father. Okay. Zogt Heilige Mishnah. Keitzad ha'edim nasen zomim. How do edim become zomim? And the first interesting thing is that the Mishnah introduces the halacha with how do edim become zomim, and the Mishnah gives us an example of edim who don't become zomim, which is going to be the very first Gemara's Kaasher. Midem anabish ploini shu ben gerusha or ben chalutza. We're going to say edus. They said edus about somebody that he's a ben gerusha or ben chalutza, meaning he's a chalal. He's not a kosher kohen, and it turns out that the story was not true. So normally it says meaning you have to make the edim into a chalal, but you don't do that. Why we don't say that, the Gemara will analyze, but the fact is we don't do that. So therefore, they get Makos, and the Gemara is also going to ask, where did the Makos come from? What if they said edus that someone killed B'shayu, and therefore he's chayiv to go into Galus? Ein oimim yiglas atachtav. You don't say now they have to go into Galus. Ella loikar boy. So we have two exceptions to the Kaasher Zomam, which the Gemara is going to explain why we can't fulfill Kaasher Zomam for them. And the Gemara, when he explains that, it's also going to bring a brayta that are going to include some other places where you couldn't fulfill Kaasher Zomam. Gewaltig. Toshus asks the Moed of Kaasher. Frek Toshus, Tema, Kivin de im Huzmu, Eino Nasis ben Grusha v'Chalutza, since you cannot do Kaasher Zomam to them, so therefore how could they be kosher? Im Kein Gam b'Shelo Yuzmu Eich Yas al Piem ben Grusha ben Chalutza, the Hachi Hu Ha'emes Ba'amai, Ha'havela Eidos Shi Ata Yochal Azima v'Ein Zeidus. Fundamental kasha. We know any edim that don't have that threat of hazama against them, we can't believe. Well, then how could we ever believe these edim? So Tosfos makes an important distinction. Tosfos says that the malchus that they get, which is what Moti is saying, since they get malchus, that's good enough of a deterrent. However, Tosfos points out that's not a good enough deterrent everywhere. If they were saying edus that somebody's chayiv misa, then unless they received misa, the fact that they get malchus would not be enough of a deterrent. But if they're saying edus about something that doesn't give somebody a chiv misa, then them getting malchus is enough of a deterrent. That's what Tosfos says, and that's a very important Tosfos. Okay, let's see the Gemara back there. Let's see the head of the Gemara. The Gemara, the Mishnah shouldn't introduce this Masechta by saying how do Edim become Zoymin, because the example was Edim not becoming Zoymin. So the Tana should have introduced the Mishnah by saying Keitzad Eina Edim Nasan Zoymin. We have another problem. We already know what Edim Zoymin are. We have a Mishnah about it. The Katani Lakamon, the Aleph thing takes out the Mem. The Katani Lakamon, Aval Amr Lahem, if a second set of Edim came and accused the first set of Edim by saying, Heich atamidim kama sherei ba'isa yoim atam yisim imanu b'makam ploini you were with us in a different place on the day that you testimony that you saw this thing happen. So that Harei Zayman. So we have a Mishnah that actually discusses the very most fundamental inyan of Edom Zayman. How does it happen? How does it occur? And that's the next Mishnah. So the question is, why is our Mishnah starting with Ketad Eina Edom Nafim Zayman? So Zaktimar Tana Hasam Kai. We're really at the end of Sanhedrin. Now, the end of Sanhedrin is really right before Perek Chelek. Perek Chelek was an add-on. So where are we, Zok Rashi? Sanhedrin Solek. The Tanan, the last Mishnah that we just learned was B'shili Elu Hanachnachim, at the end of Perek Elu Hanachnachim, the Husayum Sanhedrin, which technically is the end of Masechah Sanhedrin. And what does it say there? The Yesh Zaymamin Shenishtanu B'mitzas Midin Hazama. There are Edom Zaymamin that don't follow the normal rules of Hazama, meaning they don't receive the same punishment that they were trying to inflict. What was the case there? And normally Zaymamin get the same Misa that they wanted to inflict upon their victim. They shouldn't be looking forward to any other Misa. But there's one exception to that. We know that if two of them come along and say that a Bas Kohen Shezinsa, a Bas Kohen was Insa, she gets Shreifa, but her Boyala gets Chenek. So they were trying to give this woman Shreifa. So you don't say that they get Shreifa. They don't get Shreifa, which is the Misa that they wanted to inflict upon her. They get Chenek. They don't get. They get Chenek. They do not receive Shreifa, even though that's what they were trying to put upon her. Let's see Rashi. Nesua. She was Nesua. Even though because of these Edom, we convicted her, and she's now going to be mechuyev mitzvah shreifa. Heim bechenek. They only get chenek kili afinin hasam, like we learned over there. He b'shreifa. There's a dig from the word he. He b'shreifa. Only she gets shreifa. Ve'in bayla b'shreifa. But her boyfriend would not get shreifa. Elo bechenek kishar eshesish. No different than if he would have been mizana with any other eshesish. Now ve'azoymimin mashkimin lemisa shechayvu es haboil. They're not going to be chayiv shreifa, which is what they wanted to be mechayiv for. Rather, they're only going to be chayiv chenek, which is the misa that they wanted to be mechayiv him. The chsiv Kaasher Zomam nasis la'achiv veloy lachvaisay. And therefore, so as a continuation of what we just said, that sometimes you don't give the Edom Zaymamin the misa that they wanted to impose on their victim. Our Mishnah continues. Yesh oid zaymamin acherim she'ein mekaymin bohem din hazama klal. Now we're going to give you an example where they don't have the din hazama at all. The last example given to you at the end of Sanhedrin was where there's a din hazama, but not exactly the right misa. Now we're going to talk about Edom that don't have the din hazama at all. Elo Makos. They only have Makos. Ve'alo mefarish, and that's what our Mishnah is picking up with now. Ketzad oishon Edom she'ein mekaymin. How do they come Zaymin? So this Edus of Azama, where we're telling you we don't do the Oynish at all of the Kaasher Zomam, how do they become Zaymin? What's their story? How do these Edom that we're talking about now, our subject now is Edom Zaymin, that don't get Kaasher Zomam at all, how do they become Zaymin? Ketzad. Rather, and that explains how our Mishnah expresses itself with Ketzad Nasim Zaymin, and it also is a very good continuation from what we finished off with in Sanhedrin to what we're beginning the Masech of Makos with. Now that we got through just the reading of the Mishnah, now let's understand why is it that you cannot make them into a ben Gerusha or ben Chalutza. Zok to Gemara, Omar Bishur ben Levi, the Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "Vasisim loy," do to the corrupt Edom, Kaasher Zomam, what they wanted to do. So if you make them into a ben Grush or ben Chalutza, you're not only punishing the Edom Zomim, you're punishing their children as well. But it's Vasisim loy. The Torah only wants you to give this oynish to the Edom themselves.
This would only be if the Edom Zim are Kohanim. What if they're Israelim or Levium? You can't make somebody a shalal, and what's the havamina for that?
In but even if he's a kohen, you don't do that. Then I think that's what the Mishnah would say. Even if he's a kohen, and you
even if he's a kohen, okay.
If you're not a kohen in the you can't.
So the Gemara doesn't address that. If he's not a kohen, what do you do with him?
No, I didn't notice. I didn't notice that the Gemara addressed that. So I guess I think what the Gemara is asking, we would understand someone who is a Yisrael, you can't do Kaasher Zomam to him. But even someone who's a Kohen, you can't do Kaasher Zomam to him. I think that's what the Gemara is addressing. It's partial that we can't do Kaasher Zomam if he's a Yisrael. The what? Right. So Modi said that Rashi and the Mishnah point out that we're addressing Kohanim. Because if it was a Levi Yisrael, it's agaret that they cannot possibly become halal. So Dr. Gemara says, and if we make this kohen into a ben gerusha and chalutz into a halal, it's going to also be punishing his children. So for the Gemara, so why don't we give him up so and it won't continue? But live salu l'didei, v'loy live salu l'zari. So big deal. So make him be mechalal him. He can't do avoid the Bishul Mikdash, and he doesn't lane. He doesn't duchen, and he doesn't get the first aliyah. Do it to him. Who said you have to do it to his children as well? Gemara because in Kaasher Zomam lasos v'leka. Because then in fact you're not Kaasher Zomam. Because what he's doing is he's parceling this man and all of the children of this man. So if you only parcel him, it's not Kaasher Zomam anyway. So if it's not Kaasher Zomam, then there's no reason to do that to him. But look, Bar Omar, it's not that svara, it's a kal v'choyim. Now, this in and of itself is somewhat very problematic because telling you there's a kasher zom loy kasher. Also, since you cannot pop up his children because it's loy v'loy lazaroi, therefore it cannot be kasher zom. But the problem with it is we're gonna have a mishnah later. The halacha is. The Rambam brings down, and we learned this also at the end of Sanhedrin, that if in order to kill any member of an Ir Nidachas, there has to be Edim and Hasra for each individual violator. So the question the Rambam Paskins, and I didn't see this clear at the end of the Masechta, but the Rambam Paskins that if someone is condemned as a member of an Ir Nidachas, the whole city gets killed. Meaning this person and all of his children. This person, his wife and children, they all get killed based on the eidos of the Edom who said he saw Avodah Zarah. Well, what if these Edom, what if these Edom were Muzam? You don't kill their wives and their children. So why aren't they Edom she'iyata yochal lazimim?
Sorry, Bob. Not my favorite thing, but maybe we said this, but very strange commission start off a regular case, and then bring in the Kohen. But if he's a Kohen, none, right? Well, you're introducing Adam Zonin.
Well, ask better. You're asking why start off with the Kohen. Why not start off with what Adam Zonin is first, and then talk about the exceptions? Oh, the teretz is because we're continuing from an exception. We introduced it at the end of Sanhedrin. So that there was an exception, so that's why we're just continuing on with other exceptions, and then we're going to get back to focusing on the main Edom Zayim. In economics, yeah, you start in the Gemara, you expect a fresh start, but really we're just continuing. So the question here is, Oy bazoi, how can any Edom condemn somebody in the area of Dachas? You should have the same problem. You're not killing his children, you're just killing him. And I believe that is the Kaasher, the Chasam Sofer. So the Mefarshim answer that it must be pshat. I think the Stipler says this. It must be pshat that's not a chesron in Kaasher Zomam. Because when you're killing him, let's say he said edus on 20 different cases that they should get killed. In each case, you're killing him instead of them. Yes, he's getting punished for multiple people, but there's still something you can equate back to him. He wanted to kill this person, you kill him. He wanted to kill this person's child, you kill him. So you could be Mekayim Kaasher Zomam by killing one fake aid, even though he might have wanted to kill 20 people. But once you kill him, it would work keneged even multiple people that he violated. So the problem is, then why don't you say the same thing over here? Why don't you say over here that just like he wanted to make this man and all of his children a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, so him becoming a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, even though it doesn't go to his kids, is the same. It works as well. Keneged all those. What's the difference between if he wanted to kill somebody, where we say you'll kill him and it will be a proper Kaasher Zomam to deal with all the different people that he killed, make him into a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, and that should be good enough to cover for all the people who we wanted to make into a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza. That is the kasha that the Stipler asks. So the Stipler answers a very interesting teretz. All of the children that this man has now will become a ben Gerusha or ben Chalutza. They'll become posel. And the fact that you would make this aid into a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza will actually work fine as a Kaasher Zomam, just like it works when he's having multiple people killed. But what about children that are not yet in existence? What about children that this Kohen, who he's falsely claiming is a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, that he's going to have in the future? There, you can't say he's a cholol keneged them. He didn't do it to them. So why are they becoming ben Gerusha ben Chalutza? Because not only is he making this man, this Kohen, into a apostle, he's also making this Kohen into a paisel. What he's doing to this Kohen is not only is he making him into a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, he's making him into someone who's going to produce many more ben Gerusha ben Chalutzas. That's the nakuda where you can't do Kaasher Zomam, because by him he's only becoming a ben Gerusha, not his kids. So he made somebody into an apostle and a paisel. Rather, he himself is only becoming a apostle and not a paisel, and therefore there's a huge distinction between killing people and making someone into a ben Gerusha ben Chalutza. Because by ben Gerusha ben Chalutza, there's also people who this coin will passel in the future, and it's that component that the Gemara refers to where you can have a Kaasher Zomam like Kaasher Osa. The only reason why I'm privy to this is I used this for one of my sons, my Mr. Pshatlach. This was one of his Pshatlach, my COVID son, my Yankee, who had his bar mitzvah in COVID. So Zok Gemara Vayter. Bar Pada has another reason as to why you can't do Kaasher Zomam here. Why can't you make him into a ben Gerusha? And his time is from a Kavul Chaymer. Uma Machalel, Einoi Mischalel. A Kohen who is bought on a Gerusha, who's not allowed to marry, he's Machalel this woman, his children are Chalolim. But once he gets rid of this woman, he's not a Chalol anymore. The Kohen is only a Chalol while he's married to this woman. So Ma'amechalel, the Kohen himself, who's Mechalel other people, Einoi Mischalel, he himself does not become a permanent Chalol. He's only a Chalol while he's married to this woman that he may not be married to. So Abol Chalol, these Eidim, they weren't even Mechal anybody. They only tried to be Mechal somebody. And they never succeeded in being Mechal. Einoi Din, Shaloy is Chalol. Sure, we shouldn't make them into Chalachim. That's why we can't make him into a Chalol. Maskav lo Ravina. Ravina doesn't like this kasha because Imkain Batalta Toris Eidim Zoyim. This Kavul Chaymer will in fact work for any Eid Zoyim, and therefore you should never have Eidim Zoyim in at all. Why is that? Zok to Gemara, because I could make the following argument: Uma Haniskal Ma Soikeil Eino Niskal, and there's a little bit of a discussion what this means, but Rashi learns it's Eidim Shaloi Huzum. Eidim that you were not mazim yet. Ad shenerag hanidon. So Rachman Litzlon, two Eidim came along and falsely said testimony that Reuven is chayiv misa, that Reuven was mechal Shabbos, and in fact they killed the victim. And now Eidim came and said Imanu Yisem, the achachuzmu ein arogin. These Eidim will not get killed. So Ma Eidim Zomam that already triggered the killing of their victim, he no longer gets the din of Kaasher Zomam, and he no longer gets killed. So Habal is skoil, Veloy Sakal, Eidim that didn't even accomplish yet what they wanted to accomplish. Eino din shelo yisakal, surely there should be no skila, and therefore any Eid Zomim should be putter from the misa that he wanted to inflict. That's how Rashi learns. Tosha doesn't like this pshat because yes, you have a nice kal v'chomer, but the Torah specifically says kasher zom v'lo kasher asa. So if the Torah tells you in this particular instance, don't make the kal v'chomer, so that's why you don't make the kal v'chomer. But that doesn't mean in individual cases, like in the case of Ben Grusha, Ben Chalutza, there you're not wiping out Torah Shazama. There, of course, you can make that kal v'chomer because the Torah is not telling you the farish in the case of Ben Grusha, Ben Chalutza that you do it. But in every normal case of kasher zom v'lo kasher asa, the Torah is telling you, even though it might be counterintuitive, here you only are mechayiv somebody else, Eidim Zomim, when he has not yet done the deed. He didn't kill the guy yet. Masha Enkin, here he did. Shouldn't use that lesson, but nevertheless, that's not a kasher. Because whenever you have the Torah specifying this is how it works, it's not a kasher. So Tosfos has a different approach. Tosfos says madich. Let's see Tosfos inside. Tosfos says madich, somebody who wanted to kill somebody with skila. If you have a murderer, if you have a murderer who wanted to kill somebody with skila, he threw rocks at somebody, he doesn't get skila. You know what he gets? He gets herod because a ritzech gets herod. So ma circulate in this case. If somebody who tries to kill somebody with skila only gets herod, habol iskol v'loisakol, surely einidin shelo yisakol. So then it's only a kasha on when they're being mechayiv somebody's skila. It doesn't go against what the Torah's halach of kasher zomam. But regardless, this logs up the svara of Barpada as to why you cannot do kasher zomam here. The reason why you cannot do the kasher zomam to these edim is because you cannot make them into a ben grusha ben chalutza because it's loy v'loy lazaroi, and if they don't pass all the children of this man, then it's not a real kasher zomam. Okay, Gavalt. There's another case where our Mishnah says you can't fulfill the kasher zomam, and that is ma'idin anu b'ishploi nishu chayiv golos. So there you don't send these ayers, these edim into golos. How do we know that Allah? Omar Shlokish Omar Kra, it says, who Yonos? Only the Reitzach B'shoyeg, Yonos al Achas HaHarim. And we're Medayik, who V'loi Zoymimin. So we have a pasuk telling us that Eidim Zoymimin, that try to falsely convict somebody of killing B'shoyeg, they don't go into golos. Only the Reitzach himself. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Kavachomer, we have a Kavachomer. Umahu, She'asa Maisa. B'mezid. He did a ma'isa because the Ritzach killed somebody. Madich, the guy who killed somebody. Madich, the Ritzach who killed somebody b'mezid. So we know only a Ritzach b'shoigeg goes in golos. But a person who did Ritzicha b'mezid ain't a goyla. He doesn't go into golos. So hein shelo yasu ma'isa. But they did it b'mezid. These Eidim, they didn't physically do a ma'isa. They just said a testimony, but they did it b'mezid with the full intention of trying to kill this person. Surely they shouldn't go into golos. Madich, someone who does a ritzicha b'mezid doesn't go into golos. Someone who does a non-ritzicha b'mezid surely shouldn't go into golos. V'hi naitzenis, but that turns the whole thing over on its head, because who she'asa ma'isa b'mezid? You know why? It's clearly worse if someone did a ma'isa b'mezid versus somebody who did a non-ma'isa b'mezid. So that you want to bring a raya that someone who did a ma'isa b'mezid does not go into golos. So to the Eidim who did a non-ma'isa b'mezid, they shouldn't go into golos either. But that's not a good taina. You know why? Because who shows a ma'isa b'mezid like literally? You know why? He doesn't deserve to have a kapara merely by going to golos. Someone who killed b'mezid, you can't let him off scot-free because he went into golos. He needs to get killed. But hey, but the Eidim who didn't actually kill somebody, they just said false testimony, there's a svar that it's not as severe as having actually killed somebody via dying b'meisid, and therefore nami liglu, maybe they should go into galus kehechid lahavalu kapara. Maybe for Eidim Zaymin, the kapara of galus would be enough. So again, we shlogged out that kavachomer elamachaver takider shlokish. What is the makor of Eidim who tell somebody that he killed b'shoigeg, and now he has to go into galus, and they were false Eidim? How do we know that they don't go into galus? Is because it says hu yanas hu v'loizayim. Gewaltig. Amar Ola. Remez la'edim zayim min atayr minay. Where's there a remez in the Torah to edim zayim? Fragt you more remez la'edim zayim. Why would I need a remez for edim zayim? It's a meforish apostle. V'ksiv asisam loy Kaasher Zomam. So avada, that's not what Ul is looking for. What Ul is looking for, el remez la'edim zayim shaloikid min atayr minay. How do we know that if we cannot fulfill the Kaasher Zomam, that they get Malkus? And that's the second step of what we need to explain in our Mishnah, why if we cannot do Kaasher Zomam to them, they get Malkus. The Chsiv, it says in the Pasuk, V'tzdiku es at Tzaddik, this is discussing a case where two people are arguing about Mominus. As the full Pasuk is quoted, Ki yiriv bein anoshim. If there's going to be a disagreement between two people, V'nikshu el mishpat, so they'll go to Beth and they'll go to the Torah. Ushvatim, and the dying will pass on who's right and who's wrong. And then the Torah throws in an interesting situation here. V'tzdiku as a tzaddik, they say who's the righteous one, v'reshus as a rasha, and then the pasuk goes on, v'ayim b'dakos a rasha, and the rasha is going to get malchus. Who said just because two people go to a Torah and one is right and one is wrong, automatically somebody's getting malchus? Maybe they're arguing about if he owes them money or something. The Zoktamar, the Chsiv, Tzdikus Tzaddik, V'reshus HaRasha. And then it says, V'hayim b'dakos HaRasha. Frank Gemara, Mishum V'tzdikus Tzaddik, V'reshus HaRasha. So automatically there's someone here who deserves Malchus. V'hayim b'dakos HaRasha. Rather, the Torah is being merames to us a different halacha. Ella Eidim Sher Shiu Es Tzaddik. What happened was two Eidim came along and said about an innocent man that he did something wrong. V'asu Eidim Achrini. And now two Eidim came and said Imanu HaYisem. By saying Imanu HaYisem, what they in fact did was V'tzdiku es tzaddik, the original person who was a tzaddik, who was defamed by these Eidim, now his standing as a tzaddik has been restored. So the second set of Eidim are matzdik the tzaddik. They're restoring his position and showing that he's an innocent man, the Meikara. So V'tzdiku es tzaddik the Meikara, they restored the tzidkus of this original victim. And you know who the Rishon are? The Eidim who said false testimony on. So that's what it means. If two Eidim came along and said Imanu HaYisem about two Eidim, now they were automatically matzik the original tzaddik, and they were Marshia the Eidim. Now what do you do with this Eidim? Zok the next pasuk, v'haya im ben dakois harash. So this is a remez for Eidim Zaymin that get malchus. Practically more, why do I need this discrete limud? V'tepekle miloisana. Doesn't it say loisana v'reache choker? It's a mufurish alav that if you say false edus, you're entitled to malchus. So tomorrow, because loisana mishum dav alav she'ein b'maisa. But alav she'ein b'maisa ain't loikin alav. Merely having a law about saying false testimony, that wouldn't give you a chiv malchus because there's a problem of lav she'ein b'maisa. But the remez in the Torah says beferish. It's telling you beferish that you get malchus. So the only time you get malchus for a lav she'ein b'maisa is if the Torah says beferish. This lav she'ein b'maisa you get malchus for. But some lav that doesn't specify that there's malchus for it. If it's a lav she'ein b'maisa, you wouldn't get malchus for it. So this loisana, where does the Torah specify that you get malchus for it? The Torah specifies it by V'tzdikus HaTzadik V'reshus HaRasha in a case where it was Eidim Zayim. Tana Rabbanan, Daled Dvarim Nemru B'Eidim Zayim. There's four interesting things we said about Eidim Zayim. Number one is Einasim Ben Grusha and Chalutza, as we've already illustrated in our Mishnah. Ve'in Goyin L'Ari Mitlat, as well illustrated in our Mishnah. But there's two more. Ve'ein Mishalmon Es HaKofer. Let's say they wanted to be Mechayiv somebody Kofer, meaning they said Eidus, that Reuven's ox killed Shimon. So Reuven is mechuyev to pay kofer. If they did that, they would not have to pay kofer. And ve'enim karin be'evri. If they said edus that Reuven stole, and if Reuven didn't have money, Reuven would get sold. They when they said Edus that Reuben stole, and they turned out being fake, we don't sell them. And we're going to get into the details shortly. Mishum Rabbi Kiva, but in the name of Rabbi Kiva, they said, Af ein mishalman al piatzman. If they come to Bezdin and say we were convicted as Edom Zomam and we're being moidem b'knas, we'll be put. So we're going to see the details of these cases. So Einasan ben Grusha ben Chalutza Kid Amorin, like we explained, because you can't do the Kaasher Zomam. Then going Lari Miklot Kid Amorin, that we said who Yonus and not Edom Zomam. Then the Shalman is Kofer. Why don't they pay Kofer? Because they hold Kufra Kapara. When someone pays Kofer because his ox killed somebody else, that's to be mechaper for him for having murdered. But these people didn't murder anybody. So the onions of Kofer couldn't apply to them. Zok Gemara, man tana kufra kapar. I guess he would come out, yeah. From the same limit. So man tana kufra kapar. So this is based on if you hold kofer as a kapara. Who holds like that? Because there's a machlokes about it. The Tanya we learned, it says that someone who has to pay kofer, the Torah says, "V'nasan pidyon nafshay." He has to redeem the life. So the question is, whose life is he redeeming? Whose life is he paying for? So it's the main nizik. The Tanakhama says it's the main nizik. So it's damages, right? If you're paying the value of the nizik's life, so you're paying damages. That would be transferable to the Edom Zomam. But Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosha Brechem ben Breika Omer the Meimazik. He pays his own value. Why would I pay my own value if I killed somebody else? The teretz is I'm being paid to myself. It's a kapara. So my lab welcome the Ma'ashav of kufar mamana. The Tanakhama is kufar mamana. So I pay the damages. What are the damages? The damages are the life of the nizik. U'Ma'ashav kufar kapara. But Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosha Brechem ben Breika holds it's a kapara. You're bailing yourself out. When you're bailing yourself out, you pay your value. Amar Papa. Look, that's not shot in the machlokes. The chulu alma kufar kapara. Everybody can hold kufar kapara. The question is, what is the pidyon that you have to pay? Hashem said, you want the kapara to bail out your own soul? Pay the value of the nizik. And the other man holds that it's b'damazik sheminim. So it's possible to hold kufar kapara, and you still only pay the main nizik. To us, it doesn't matter. If it's kufar kapara, the Edom Zomam don't need this kapara, so therefore it wouldn't make sense for them to pay kafir. My tamayu d'Rabbanan. So what is the svara of the Rabbanan? Meaning the Rabbanan who hold kufar kapara at this point, we want to say everybody else kufar kapara. Why would they say you pay the domain nizik? It would still be more logical to pay the domain mazik. Because nemar hashasa lamata, the nemar hashasa lamayla. It says hashasa earlier and it says hashasa later. And Rashi tells us the two psukim that it's referring to. The hashasa lamayla, Rashi says, by noigef ishahara, if someone punched a woman who was expecting and the babies die, kasher yoshis olav bala isha. There he's paying the value of the babies. It says hashasa lamata by kofer and kofer yushas olav. So we compare the two and we say, ma lehalon b'denizik. Just like when someone damages babies, he pays the value of the babies. B'denizik shemina. Afkan b'denizik. So you can have kufar kapara, but you pay the value of the nizik. Rabbi Shmuel says no. V'nosan pidyon nafshay ksiv. By kofer it says pidyon nafshay. Who are we talking to? We're talking about the mazik. He has to pay his own value. V'rabanan it does say pidyon nafshay ksiv. Miu he shayminan b'denizik shayminan. So there's an argument if you could say that even though you're paying your own kapara, maybe the way you pay for your own kapara is to pay for the value of this. So we got in an extra machlokes of whether or not you pay b'denizik or b'damazik, but regardless, if you hold kufra kapara, it wouldn't be something that you could put on the Edom Zomam. Then the fourth halacha we learned in the Mishnah and the Brayso that we quoted was Edom Kar and Be'evid. You don't sell them as an Evid Ivri. So Savar Rav Hamnuna Lamemar, at first glance, Rav Hamnuna thought to explain it this way. Hanamili, Hecha de Islay Lididei. You know when you don't sell them? You don't sell them is if their victim, who they falsely said that Reuven stole money, Reuven himself has enough money to pay back. So since he has enough money to pay back, he would not have been sold. So they can say, we didn't want to get him sold. We only wanted him to pay money because we knew he had the means with which to pay. So therefore, the migu, the EU, since they never intended to get him sold because they knew he could pay back, you wouldn't be able to sell them either because that's not what they were trying to do. But Rabbi Menuna thought, what if the person who they lied about, Reuven stole, what if they knew Reuven didn't have a penny to his name to pay back? So they knew it would lead to Reuven getting sold. Avagav the Istu who, even if they have the money and they could pay, they get sold because that's what they were going to do to Reuven. They were going to get him sold. And on that, the Gemara said, V'lem relay, let the Edom argue. I don't understand. Why should we be worse than him? If you would have had money, Reuven, me have a mizdavnos, you wouldn't have been sold. So what the false agents that we set on you only put you into a situation where you have to pay back, and if you don't have money, then you get sold. So don't put more than that upon us. So us as well. And not me, loy mizdavnino. We shouldn't be sold. Because give us that same option that we gave you. But the technicality is that we have the money. So therefore we shouldn't be sold. Ella, Sover Rav Hamnuna Lameimar, let's change what Rav Hamnuna said. Hanamili, Heicha de Isle, Oilidide, Oiliditu. If either they have money or their victim has money, then he wouldn't be sold. Then the Edom would not be sold. What if Reuven doesn't have any money and Reuven would have been sold? And these Edom don't have money either to pay Reuven. So then they have to be sold as well. Then Mizdavni, in fact, the Edom Zomam would be sold. Amalei Rava said, no, regardless, we will never sell Edom. Why? Because you only sell somebody if you stole. Someone who said false edus, that's someone who will never be subject to being sold. And now we have the last halacha. Rabbi Kiva says that they're not mishalman al piyat. Mishum Rabbi Kiva Amru, my time with Rabbi Kiva, why wouldn't they pay if they're moedeh? Because kasavar kanasahu. Rabbi Kiva holds this whole concept of Edom Zomam is only a knas. Uknas ein mishalman al piyatzmai. Moedeh b'knas is potter. So therefore, if you were moedeh that you're chayiv a knas, you would not get sold. You would not suffer the punishment of Kaasher Zomam. Amar Rabba Teda, I'll bring you a raya. Shari loy asu ma'isa. The fact is they didn't even do anything. V'narag in the mishalman. Yet we'll either kill them if that's what their edus was about, or we'll make them pay if that's what their edus was about. Yet there was no ma'isa that they did. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't do anything. Amar, so that's how you know it's a knas. Amar Nachman Teda Shari maman biad bailim mishalman, which seems to be the same thing. At the end of the day, the victim didn't pay what they wanted him to pay, yet we still make the Edom pay. So, Frek the Gemara onto Gimel Amar Aleph, what does it mean? What does it mean when we say this? The second pshat that Rab Nachman wanted to add was what? Shari maman biad bailim mishalman. L'maisa, they didn't do anything. The L'maisa, they were proven wrong before the victim paid. So, isn't that exactly the same thing as what? Isn't that exactly the same thing as what Rava said a moment ago? So, Frek the Gemara, my need less than Maisa, Hani the Rava. Rab Nachman was not coming up with a new chiddush. Rab Nachman was just reinforcing what he heard from Rab. Amar Yehuda Amar Rab. Eid Zomim Mishalom L'fi Chalka. What if there's two Edom Zomim that were going to be Mechayev Reuven $1,000? So now each of these two Edom only have to pay $500. Between the two of them, they have to pay the 1,000. Let's get into the details of what this would involve. Ilema the high mishalim palgo, If the chiddush of what Rav wanted to say is that they split the bill, well, Tanina, I don't need Rabbi Yehuda or Rav to tell me that. There's a Mefursha Brisa. It says Mishalshalin b'mammon, then Mishalshalin b'malchus. And this means if there was, let's say, there were 3 Edom in the group, they each pay a third. But that's when it comes to money. When it comes to malchus, they each get the full malchus. So that cannot be what Rav is trying to tell us. Ella, maybe this is what Rav is trying to tell us. What if only one of these two Edom were muzam? Two Edom came and said that Reuven owes Shimon $1,000, and and one of them was proven to be wrong. The Mishalim Palga today, so he pays 500. Fake tomorrow, but that's not true. Umi Mishalim, he wouldn't. Vatanya ain't Eid Zayim Mishalim Mammon Ad Yazumu Shneya. They're not considered Edim Zayim until they're both Huzam. So he wouldn't pay 500, he would pay 0 unless both Edim are Huzam. Omarava, the Omer Edu Sheker. Let's look at the Hey Aditi. If someone was Moida that he said Edu Sheker. So he was not an Edim Zayim, he was just agreeing that he said Edu Sheker. This is how the Bach learns it. Tosfos has a different shot. So Rav said, "Ba'omer Edu Sheker Aditi." Frank the Gemara, Kol Kamine, he can't come along and say on his own that he said Edu Sheker, because Kivan Shehigid Shuv Ein Chayzer Umagid. Once he says Edus, he cannot possibly retract that Edus. Zok the Gemara Ella Ba'omer He Adnu. They said that we said Edus. Vihu Zamnu Bebezdin Ploni, and we were proven to have been Muzam Bebezdin Ploni. So in such a case is what we're saying, where they pay lefi chelkai. So Zok to Gemara, 1 second. So Zok to Gemara, Elova'imer Hey Adnu V'Huzamnu Bebezdin Ploni. They come along and say we were moida. So Rashi says, Hey Adnu Aniu Ploni V'Chavera Ein Moida. So the case was, he comes along, one of the two Eidim comes along and tells Bezin, me and my friend, we were both Musam, so therefore I don't have to pay my chelik because I was Moida, but my Chaver is not Moida, so that's where we say he pays Lefi Chelkoi, he pays his half. Because he's not retracting his Edus. He says, I said Edus, I never retracted, but we were Musam. We both said Eidim, and we both were Musam. And I'm running down to another bezin to be moided that I was Muzam. So I'm moided b'knas. So it's potter al Kiva. So even though I'm potter, because I was moided b'knas, my friend Eid, who's not being moided that he was Huzam, he's going to have to pay his half. So it's not keeping. I'm not retracting my testimony. I'm admitting that I was Huzam. So I said testimony in bezin. I was Huzam. They were not yet mechayiv mi moment. They didn't. It was proven that I was Huzam, that I were Machayev bin Bezin. I ran away. We both ran away. No, he's saying I was Huzam. But the point is, he was already convicted of Hazama. Before he's convicted of Hazama, he cannot retract his testimony. Once he's convicted of Hazama, it doesn't matter anymore. His testimony is bottled. Now the question is he chayiv? You see, the earlier case was before he was Huzam, he retracted his testimony, so now you can't be Mazamin anymore. But that's what the Gemara says. No, you could still be Mazamin, because once he said his testimony, he can't back out. If he can't back out, you could still be Mazamin after that. Here we're saying you were Mazamin Taka, but he was Moida in another Bezin that he was Muslim in a different Bezin. So they were Mazamin before they had a chance to make him pay. Him and his buddy ran away. And then he had a hero tshuva, so he went into a Bezin in a different town, and he said, by the way, I was Huzam. So therefore, he's going to be potter because he's moed b'knas. But his friend is going to be chayiv, so he pays l'fechelka. El b'omer he had no v'uzam b'bez employee. So come on, the loy kir Rabbi Kiva. This can't be according to Rabbi Kiva. The kir Rabbi Kiva ha'amar af ein misham al piatzmai. So it's punkvigert. He came in and said, I was huzam, and therefore I want to pay my fair share. I'll pay my fair share. The other guy is on the loose. I'm not on the loose. I came and I was moed, so I pay my fair share. So this can't go like Rabbi Kiva, because according to Rabbi Kiva, the fact that you were moida automatically patters you from paying your share. So again, where would it be noigeya psak, where we're making somebody pay only his share? If someone comes to Bezin and says, I was muzam, and not only was I muzam, the verdict came out, v'chuyavnu mammon. Now once Bezin is mechayiv you mammon, it's no longer a knas. It's just like Geneva. If you stole money, you could be moida until Bezin is mechayiv you. But once Bezin is mechayiv you kefel, now that kefel becomes mammon. It becomes a liability. So that's what he said. That they weren't just mazami; they actually set out the verdict that I am chayiv to pay $500. So there, his moida b'knas won't help him. And then he ran away before he paid the money, and then he ran to another Bezin and admitted that he was Mechliv to pay $500. So Kedai Chamina Kivin Del Chavri Lemotzim L'Chayiv, since he can't get his chaver to pay his fair share, his chaver denies it. Maybe we don't make him pay his share. Kamash Malon, that we will make him pay his share. Okay, we'll stop here, Be'ez Hashem, and we will continue tomorrow. When should we learn on Shabbos? We should probably learn